Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's webinar. My name is Josh Odisho. I sit within the marketing team here at Symmetry, and today we're very lucky to have Symmetry's own Head of Customer Engagement joining us, Mr. Nicky Wilkins. He's going to talk us through what we found to be the 7 deadly sins of college finance departments up and down the country, and of course, how to overcome them. This talk got some great feedback at Nicky's last Accountex event. Saw people flooding through the doors to watch, and consequently, it was spotlighted by American Express globally. So we're in for a treat. Before I hand over the reins, I'd just like to let you know that we'll be sending out the recording for this webinar soon after. So feel free to sit back, absorb the information, rather than scrubbing around and taking notes. And if you've got any questions at all, feel free to just note them down and then just get in touch with Nicky after the presentation and he'll be very happy to help. Right, over to you, Nicky.
Thank you very much, Josh. I shall try and live up to that fantastic introduction. Yes, the 7 deadly sins of college finance departments. It sounds very dramatic. This actually started as a white paper written by Ken Rose, our senior business consultant, working reflectively, having at that point 5 years ago, having implemented finance systems within colleges for 20 years. We're now 25 years old this year, and actually, interestingly, the same sins still apply. And as Josh said, we took that and turned it into a talk which we've toured around various shows, college shows and Accountex. So I hope you enjoy it, and we'll begin now. So, what I'll be covering today, well, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to this idea of there being a better way. It's something that's core to what we do at Symmetry in terms of how we develop our product and how we look after our customers. We'll then talk about the 7 deadly sins. And then I'll just finish by giving you an example of a customer that we've worked with in terms of helping them overcome those sins. For those of you that don't know me, as Josh said, I head up the customer engagement team here at Symmetry, and my role is twofold, really. I work along with my team to help our customers get the best from our software, from Bluecube, but also just to try and help them find better ways of doing things within the finance team. I also work with customers that are coming to us new for the first time, that are thinking about changing finance systems. And actually, one of the first things that we do in that situation is try to work holistically and say, well, what is it that needs changing, and why do you feel that? And sometimes we've actually helped customers get the best from their existing system, and that's fine for me. You know, I always just look for the best solution. So in terms of Bluecube, as I say, Bluecube is our accounting software package for finance teams. We have been working within the FE market for 25 years, and in that time there has been a lot of changes, not necessarily to accounting. Accounting pretty much stayed the same, but technology has evolved. What you can do with that technology has evolved, and as you'll hear in the talk today, there's a lot that has changed in that time, and we use that to best effect in order to help people solve their problems, and we combine that with our service and our support. I alluded to those changes that we've seen, and if you went back 25 years, possibly even further back, you'd have found that the head of finance within a college or within any organization had a fairly simple role, dare I say it. You know, the main responsibilities were around ensuring that the books balanced, ensuring that monthly reporting was sent out on time, and probably dealing with the audit. But these days, actually, a head of finance does so much more and is involved strategically within the organization, within the direction of the college. So we see now conversations with head of finance where we will really try to shape and understand return on investment. They're doing a lot more key performance indicators, not just from finance, but actually around the college. being in the know. So actually the person that can be relied upon to provide accurate and clear and understandable information, acting before it's too late, so being able to actually point things out and flag when action needs taken, being able to provide benchmarking, being able to drive efficiency. So it's a lot more than just balancing the books. So that's our world now. I'm going to do my very best not to mention COVID in this talk, because we've talked about it a lot over this series of FE webinars, but obviously the world has changed as a result. But as I say, these deadly sins that we're going to talk about, they were written 5 years ago, and a lot of them actually haven't changed one bit. So let's talk through what they are. As I do that, I will be explaining to you how to identify the sin, but also how to change it. And there will be 3 levels of things that you can change. Things that you could do immediately, you know, today, straight away with a cup of coffee. Things that will probably need a bit of a plan before you think about the change. And then there'll be things that will require more time and more investment. And as Josh said, at the end of this webinar, if you have questions, if you'd like to talk through thinking about how to make some of these changes, for all of you that have attended, I'm delighted to offer my time and to talk that through. It's something I genuinely enjoy doing. So the first sin is ownership. And actually, I mean this in the best possible way, because what I see with a lot of heads of finance directors within colleges and organizations is they take on too much ownership. We're not talking about people being slopey-shouldered. We're talking about the sort of people that say, yes, let me help you with that. Let me take that on. And that is a fantastic attribute. It's a fantastic bit of those people's personalities, but it can mean that everything gets funneled through them. So what you might start to see is that processes inevitably slow down as they get caught up in that bottleneck. That you hear and see people starting to say, I don't have time, I'm struggling. And if you're not seeing that, then there's always one thing that's worth thinking about, which is that metaphorical bus. You know, what happens if suddenly that person who is the center of all processes isn't available? You know, what happens if they fall ill? What happens if, you know, you have to put a contingency in place? So if that chimes with you, you recognize that. How do you fix it? Well, one of the things, and I know it sounds obvious, is to stop saying yes. It can be habit forming. It can be something that people like to do, but actually challenge yourself the next time you feel yourself instinctively saying, yes, I'll do that, or oh, it's quicker for me to do that. Start thinking about how you can help other people to help themselves. Start thinking about bringing them on. It may take longer in the short term, but in the medium to longer term, what it should mean is you're starting to get more of your time back. If that's not an issue, one of the things you might want to think about is making a list. I'll talk about a number of lists in this morning's webinar. And the first one is looking at your weekly tasks. This is a very interesting one to do honestly. So sit down, think about what you do on a weekly basis, and then imagine what would happen if you could delegate all or most of those tasks. Try not to get caught up in the hows. Just actually think about, right, if I drew a line and I no longer did those tasks, those went somewhere else, what would I do? I've done this with people. We've talked that through in workshops, and what we found is instantly they start saying, well, then I'd be able to get to this bit of my job. Then I'd start being able to think about next year's plan. Then I'd be able to start looking at that costing model. And immediately they think of things that are more beneficial. So it's a good exercise to do, even if it just starts to highlight actually where your time is going. Something that will come up a couple of times this morning is if you want to start investing in software or in solutions, then I would definitely draw your attention to the ability to automate processes. So in modern software now, you will start to see the ability to automate purchase invoice processes, to automate debt management processes, to automate reporting processes. Within Blue Cube, we've got customers now that are able to actually run most of their purchase ledger transactions without the finance team getting involved at all until the payment run is created. And by that, what I mean is Teams are raising purchase orders. These devolved teams are approving those orders before they go out. The invoice comes back in. It's picked up by OCR technology, which is automatically scanned and processed within Blue Cube, and then that is then sent back out for approval before ultimately being packaged into a payment run. And that's the first time that somebody within the finance team reviews and says, yes, we're happy with that. That might sound like futuristic world, but it's here now. And again, happy to tell you more about that after the webinar. So duplication of work as our second sin. And what I would say, if you're not sure if this is happening in your organization, is start looking for multiple touches. Now, I say that very carefully. What I mean here by multiple touches is where a process or a transaction or a piece of information is being rekeyed more than once, is being picked up and put down by more than one person, or if you're starting to find that you still have paper. I know we've had to sort of move an awful lot digitally in the last couple of years, but pre-lockdown, I was still going out and working with people thinking about changing their software, where they were saying we're still using carbon paper flimsies, so they are still out there. If that's something that you're familiar with, then yes, definitely you're going to find you've got a duplication of work. The other one, which is subtler, is multiple versions of the truth. And what I mean by that is you will obviously produce reports from your finance system. You'll find around the college other people are producing reports from their systems, but there will also be those Excel spreadsheets, those manual collections of information where people say, well, this is my running tally, this is my version of the truth. And those can be quite destructive. Not only are they a waste of somebody's time usually in terms of putting them together, but what you ultimately end up with is somebody saying, well, I think my one's true. Well, no, I think my one's true. So if you see that, how do we fix it? Well, first of all, take a look at the reports that you create. So the thing you can do straight away, list all the reports that get circulated from the finance team. I would expect you will find that information is being duplicated, even there, where you'll be sending out a number of reports and you can say, actually, this is saying the same thing. We only need one of these. So bin off the ones where you're duplicating it, bin off the ones where they're not being read. Do you have budget holders that you send reports to on a monthly basis and they never read them? Stop sending the reports. See if there's a better way of helping them get that information. Store your data only in one place. And for me, that is in a secure and functional database. Try and avoid holding data in Excel spreadsheets. I'm not talking about producing reports in Excel, because that might be the easiest way to create something digestible. I mean, where people are keeping reconciliations, running totals, and they're holding that data actually outside of the system in a database and saying, this is my record. No, that all needs to go into a single place. Then, in an ideal world, yes, if you're thinking about investing, join those systems together. So you're not having somebody taking all the student information out of the MIS system and rekeying it into the finance system. And yes, I have seen that still recently. You should have a situation in an ideal world where student enrolls in a college, that gets automatically pushed through into the MIS system. The payments are taken automatically through the payment portal. All of that data automatically ends up in the finance system. And from MIS perspective, from a finance perspective, nobody has had to key in anything. That is achievable and definitely worth considering. Only looking backwards. So this is my favorite image in this talk. And what I'm alluding to is not a tidal wave coming crashing down on top of you, but actually where you're spending too much time going back. So do you find that transactions are keyed in inaccurately and you have to go back and reverse transactions back out, reverse journals back out and recode? Do you find that it's easier to do some of those things longhand? So instead of trying to get people to key things in or trying to get the detail into the system, you end up actually putting things in at a summary level and then breaking that detail down in a different way. Do you find you're drawn into issues? So do you find you have rabbit holes? And the one that is budget holders, I'm afraid, that comes up a lot is, yes, they don't read their monthly budget report, but they do phone up once a week saying, oh, I'm not sure what's going on, or can you give me some more information on this, or oh, I don't think that's against my code. All of that takes time. So if you're being drawn into that, then you definitely might find you're guilty of that, looking backwards instead of being able to spend time looking ahead. Okay, so how do you fix that? Well, we've talked about that list of reports, spinning off the ones that you don't need. Now, you should have a list of ones that, yes, are definitely worth producing, but are you still the right person to produce them? Is it possible for you to be able to get somebody else within your team? Is it possible to get the system to automate that? If you're having problems with budget holders or other stakeholders who need information, can you enable them to serve themselves so that doesn't become something that is part of your team's job on a regular basis? And if that feels like quite significant changes within how you normally process, actually, rather than that feeling like something that you think, I'm never going to get around to doing that, make it somebody else's job. Make it give somebody an opportunity to run that as a project. So we feed in, we help people to make these changes. We use a simple model in order to make decisions called FAST. We help people gather the facts, so to understand what the problem is, analyze what's available, and then come up with multiple solutions. It's very easy at this point for somebody to go, oh, we just need to do X. And that might be a great idea, but it's always worth thinking through every solution that's available and testing each one and starting to actually learn, well, actually, unsurprisingly, this was better. So I would recommend using a model like that in order to help your decisions. Okay, so we talked about time management where people are saying yes all the time, and that's as I say, that's a fantastic quality. We're now going to look at the other side of that coin. So, are you finding actually people aren't managing their time well? Do you find that you have ouch moments? So, what do I mean by that? Well, it wasn't in a college; it was in a business. But I had a customer a number of years ago where I happened to be on site at the time, where they found out that they had just been fined by revenue for not paying the tax bill. And why didn't they pay the tax bill? You might think because actually that person had been doing a fantastic job, they thought, creating a list of suppliers and going and talking to suppliers about whether they could pay them early and get better terms. So they thought they were doing the right thing. Unfortunately, they hadn't understood the priorities, and they ended up costing their business more than they had been able to save. That's an unusual one, I grant you, but there can be a lot of those ouch moments where priorities aren't clear. Do you find you hear people within your team saying, I don't have time? There might be, as I say, genuine reasons for that. They may also be one of those yes people that say, yes, I'll help you. But it's worth, instead of just leaping in and saying, oh, let me take something away from you then, let me free some time up, start asking the question, why don't you have time? What is it that's causing the problem? If you can fix that, you'll fix it for both of you. Now, if neither of those are an issue for you, fantastic. The one thing I would encourage you to do is just simply look at, again, your weekly tasks and see if you can identify which job takes you longest. Is there something you could do to take that off your list? So, fixes, well, yes, communicate the priorities, avoid that ouch moment. As I say, you may think that's obvious, but it is definitely worth checking. Quite often amongst different people understand priorities in different ways. Can you move the problem? So we and other people do as well, I know, provide outsourcing now. So we have the ability to offer customers either temporary or full-time solutions where if they lose members of staff, we can take on things like the accounts receivable chasing, accounts payable processing. And that can create time, create resource within your team. And again, I've said it, but it will become a recurring theme. Automation is becoming so powerful now that, as I say, you can get to the point where the system can run the entire process, even actually to the payment of those invoices if you wanted to. So definitely there are solutions available to create more time for you. Insecurity. So again, a lovely image. I'm not talking about emotional or personal insecurity here. I am talking about data. I'm going to try and avoid turning this into a GDPR webinar because I'm sure we've all been on those and we've all learned as much as we possibly can. But it is not going away. And actually what we are seeing over the last couple of years is that within the finance team, the finance head is becoming far more responsible, possibly than they would want to, for the security of their data and the security of data within the college. Cyber Essentials obviously coming in is making a big change within that regard. So what are you looking for? Well, I talked about Excel sheets holding information outside of a finance system. It is one of the things I see a lot, and it can be quite concerning in places. I've seen organizations where we've got a secure finance system, fantastic, that's holding all the data, that ticks all the boxes, and then data is being extracted out into an Excel spreadsheet and being emailed around the college, and that can be holding quite highly sensitive data that absolutely shouldn't be just open in a spreadsheet. Think about access. So who can see what? If that's the solution to sharing that information, is it possible to think about giving people access into the system? Look for responsibility. So how much do you want? Again, are you the bottleneck? Are you having to see everything go through you in terms of approvals, or you can devolve that out? So fixes, well, as I say, get rid of those spreadsheets. If you can think about giving people secure access into a system, where they can view but not necessarily edit, that can dramatically save time, but it can also dramatically improve the security of that data. Try and avoid processes where people have to work outside of that system. So things like budget control, purchase approvals, again, drive people back into the software. And then in terms actually of the overall protection of the data, try and share that problem out to third parties. We've been running a cloud system for 10 years now, and for our customers, they have no concerns and no risk when it comes to the security of their finance system, because we take care of that for them. So cloud is certainly one solution that enables you to be able to say, that's not my problem. Long-winded manual processes. So we've sort of alluded to this in some of the other sins, but it's definitely deserved of its own. So what do I mean? What should you be looking for? Well, we've just touched on, from a security perspective, processes that take place outside of the box, outside of the software. What we also tend to see at that time is too many people being involved, either needlessly because they're rekeying and duplicating work, or because you've got a process which is going round and round in circles. We also see quite often that attitude of, but this is how I've always done it, and one of the ones that stood out to me was a bank reconciliation exercise where statement items were being loaded into the bank, the transactions were sitting in the finance system, the finance software is reconciling all of these off, and matching them off, and then I saw somebody literally print the bank statement off, print all of the system transactions, and then sit down, and they did this once a week, probably for about a day, and line by line go through all the transactions, line by line go back into the finance system and make sure that was the transaction. And I asked them to talk me through it, and I said, but do you ever see any differences? Well, no, but this is how we've always done it. I'm like, but your finance system is already doing that. So that's an example, again, a bit of an extreme one, but you might find within your own team that there are people doing that sort of manual reconciliation, and it may not be needed. So how do you fix it? Well, again, list those checks. Sometimes that human being doing a sanity check is really, really useful, but more often than not, if you can drive reconciliations and checks into the software, you should find that is more reliable. Again, assess the risk on making that decision. So where are you comfortable that you will just let the system make the decision and have control? That could be on spending limits, that could be on discrepancies, on errors. But it's worth thinking about where you spend a lot of time trying to fix something really for no great result. And then get the right people involved. So we've talked about devolving processes out. So instead of you spending a lot of time looking at approvals, looking at these processes, you're getting other people to do that so that you're freed up. So the last one is a bit more subjective. So we've called it missing funding, and I like this image. I think it's a wonderful idea that you sat there looking under the sofa cushions for funding. That's not really what I mean. What we're talking about is finance teams and heads of finance being able to add more value within an organization. As I alluded to at the beginning of this, the role of a finance head has changed. So rather than just dealing with the bookkeeping and the accounting, you should now be actually having a commercial input into the performance of the college. So you might find that you come up against things where you're asking questions about the true cost of courses, the true cost of what it takes to generate the income, to generate the funding. And if you start hearing phrases like, but that's impossible to know that, everybody knows we always have to run these sorts of courses. If you start looking at plans and forecasts provided by departments and you notice that they are veering off course and you hear that phrase, well, nobody knows why. Again, those should be sirens, red flags of actually this probably does need a more forensic look. And that's where somebody with finance training or somebody who has the information at their fingertips can really provide additional value. So what are the fixes? Well, as I say, the first thing is getting your facts. So make sure you're working from source info. You'll have access to the actuals within the finance system. If you can couple that with the real student record numbers of not just when they enrolled, but did they stay on through those terms, you should be able to get to the point where you can actually run a true cost for each course. And then it's about starting to ask questions. So yes, that will give you one picture. You should be able to actually quite articulately say, we've run these courses, these students went through, that's the cost per head, including things like utilities and cost per room and everything else. Then you're in a position where you can start saying, well, okay, are we seeing that funding back? Are we achieving that? And if not, then why not? And again, we've helped many customers who are using Bluecube to achieve that kind of activity cost, true cost-based model. So if that's something you'd like to talk about, we'd be delighted to help you there in more detail. Okay, so when I used to present this in front of people, we would do an exercise where we'd stand up, and that was quite fun. So I'm not going to do that now. So I will trust you to confess to just yourself. But as a quick summary, the sins we've covered were ownership. So are in fact you the bottleneck? Do you take on too much? Can you think about taking on less? Do you have duplication of work within the organization? So here we're thinking about rekeying data and instead looking at integration as a solution. Remember we talked about only looking backwards. So do you spend a lot of time going back against processes and rejournaling and recorrecting transactions? And a way to put controls in place to avoid that. We talked about poor time management in a different way. So are you finding that people are telling you they don't have enough time and in fact they're caught up doing the wrong things or not prioritizing? We talked about security of data and whether there's too much data or finance information being held outside of systems. Talked about manual processes. Do you spend too long doing things that actually offer no real value? Can you consider automation? Can you consider the software taking on more? And then we talked about missing funding. So can we present a true picture, a clear picture of actually what it takes to achieve funding through courses? We've given you 3 levels of takeaways. As we've said, we're going to send you a copy of this webinar. So there'll be things you can do straight away, things that you might need to make a plan for, things that might require more time and investment. And on those second 2, if you want more help and you want more support, you're very welcome to get in touch with us. We'd be delighted to talk to you and offer more suggestions on how you can achieve that. Now, finally, I said I would actually give you a brief story of somebody that we've helped who has been, experienced probably all of these 7 sins all in one go. So this is Bob. Bob was the finance director of a large college group. So they were involved with not just running the FE college, but they also had multi-academy trust. They also had other learning enterprises. And those had evolved over time and acquisition. And so where Bob was that within that group, he actually had effectively 3 separate entities, all of which were running 3 separate finance systems, which meant presenting a consolidated view to the board would take him the best part of 2 weeks to prepare every month, and also meant he was working weekends most months. He had quite a large finance team split across those separate entities in terms of people who he'd inherited. They weren't all working in an aligned way. You had a lot of duplication of effort. And also they weren't happy themselves. They weren't happy in the work that they were doing. And because these systems didn't join up, because the processes didn't join up, as you can see, there was lots of pieces of paper, lots of email, lots of Excel spreadsheets whizzing around. And Bob, sadly, was a rather unhappy soul. So then he selected Bluecube as his new finance system. And the first thing that we did was we rolled Bluecube out across all 3 entities. We created a consolidated finance system so that Bob was able to actually automatically distribute a consolidated performance report and set of management reports on a monthly basis to the board just by clicking a button, and that would happen every month. All processes, all workflow will run through the finance system. So there's no more manual Excel extracts. There's no more budget holders saying, oh, you know, I need this budget report. Everybody was able to serve themselves by using the software. Everybody was able to approve purchase orders, raise purchase orders, look at information. So, and as a result, that meant that Bob was able to run with a much smaller, happier finance team. Now, the people that weren't a part of that new team, they didn't lose their jobs. They were actually being able to give new roles, they were able to do something more beneficial to those enterprises. But it meant that the time, the resources were considerably streamlined. And as you can see, Bob, smiling, happy person, no longer working at weekends. So if any of that has chimed, if any of you are thinking, yes, I might be Bob, or I might have been Bob, and you'd like to know a bit more about Bluecube, next week we are running a webinar giving you an insight just into what makes Bluecube different. It's a quick 10-minute demo. We'd be delighted to have you there. And if you would like to talk to us, as I've said throughout this webinar, if there's things within these sins, if there's actions that you'd like to talk about more, I'd be delighted. It's what I do on a daily basis. And yes, please do drop me a line. And I look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you.